Welcome to the Web of Brothers, the podcast devoted to bridging the gap between generations of Black men. Our mission is to provide a platform for idea sharing, dialogue, mentorship, and learning.
All right, so welcome to episode of whatever we call this thing, a Web of Brothers. Today we have a special guest with us today, Mr. Raymond Brown. So we thank you all for being on. We're gonna spend some time talking to Raymond today. Just a little bit about himself, and I believe, if I'm understanding correctly, Raymond, you're a realtor, but in the back, I know I see mortgage. So I want to make sure I definitely get that part right.
You got it right.
Okay. So definitely want to hear more about that. But I think maybe just to maybe get started, maybe just tell us a little bit about yourself, where you grew up and maybe what kind of got you even, where you are today.
Okay. Originally, I'm from North Florida, a little small town, Jasper, Florida. It's not too far from.
Are you really from Jasper?
Yes.
There's not many people from Jasper.
Well, that's because Jasper is a small place. We do have about 5,000 to 6,000 residents now.
I would say, do you know if you have any family that are Corbetts? Corbett?
No, I don't.
Okay.
We migrated to this part of Florida a long time ago, back in the 80s.
Yeah,
So
I was going to say, I know that Jasper family, they migrated probably 30 years prior. But it was just, that's a random place. And I know that's a place we used to go visit. And I can't remember, we see pecans from, we get all kinds of stuff. But I remember Jasper, man. It was, small little place to go.
A little small country town. My mother's family is from there. Never really had a connection with my father and his people, so it's always been just my mother's family. So that side of the family, we're from North Florida.
So your father didn't move down with you when you guys moved down?
No, that's probably a longer story than what we have time for in this podcast or Zoom call, so I probably won't get into it too much. They weren't really together, it's one of those things. So my mother was a single mother, and she and my uncles migrated to this part of Florida back in the 80s, looking for work, looking for opportunity. Jasper's a small place, and opportunities there are small. Growing up in St. Petersburg, I did spend a lot of years. I haven't lived in St. Petersburg for a very long time, and that's mostly due to the real estate market and the way that the prices have been in St. Petersburg. But growing up in St. Petersburg, I learned a lot. There's a lot of opportunity. When you come from a small place like I did, when you come to a place that's bigger, where there's more opportunity, it's pretty easy to tune into that. And
how old were you roughly when you guys moved here in the 80s?
I was in grade school. I want to say maybe like first grade,
okay.
Second grade, very young.
Okay.
But still old enough to have experienced what life was like, living in a rural area. And I'm in my late 40s now. So we're talking like 1970s, very early 80s. And if you think about where this country was, particularly for minorities and for Black people back during those times, it was definitely a lot different than now. So I had already seen, poverty and absolute poverty at that. I mean, we had concerns that were much different back in those days than when you come to a larger city, where the things that you take for granted every day, like utilities and, just living arrangements, everything in St. Petersburg and the Bay Area, everything was much better than, being in a rural little country town back during that time. So even as a kid growing up, I could dream bigger. I had aspirations, things that I had not experienced back where I'm from originally.
Well, I think that's a very interesting thing to bring up because, kind of growing up in that, it's a, you can kind of grow up kind of entitled to it and almost to a point where, you just feel like that is just regular, you know what I mean? That it's just one of those things that everybody has. You really take it for granted. So, thinking about that, I'm sure that impacted you in some ways, and definitely how you probably saw yourself growing up, and like you said, the opportunities you saw ahead of yourself.
Absolutely. I don't know. I think it's a lot of it is perception. I mean, I can remember kids that I went to school with, middle school, high school at well, then it was 16th Street. Today it's John Hopkins and St. Pete High School. And I remember kids from those years, and they didn't have the same sort of experience that I had had. So it's like St. Petersburg was what they knew, and the world wasn't necessarily any bigger than that. So it's kind of difficult to think outside the box and to aspire to become something different than what your surroundings are every day. For me growing up, I think that I knew that there were possibilities just to be in surroundings that were a lot larger. You know, the parameters were much greater than where I initially started out at in life. And so my vision was always different, even though when we came, I mean, obviously we were poor in Jasper, we got to St. Petersburg, we were still poor, but now we were poor in a much larger town. I mean, the difference today, Jasper has between 5,000 and 6,000 residents. When I lived there, we may have had 1,000. St. Petersburg, on the other hand, there's, you know, between, I'd say 250 to 300,000 residents, and that number is growing every day. That's a big shift. That's almost like a continental shift. And with numbers, all things rise and fall according to the numbers. So when your numbers increase exponentially, so do opportunities.
Agree. I definitely agree. But once again, I think even when we start talking, and I know a lot of our conversations lately have been about gentrification. A lot of times you don't seem to really understand that. I know, growing up in Florida, one thing I've always heard is that there's X amount of people moving here every single day. You know what I mean? The number just seems crazy. But when I look at this area, and to your point, when you get a chance to travel, you find that most people know your area as a retirement home. It's like everywhere I go, it's like, oh yeah, that's where people retire, And then you start to think about, the things I did grow up with, shuffleboard and folk dance. It's like, the things you think you grew up in. You're like, yeah, I guess we are kind of an old school.
I do
And then I
remember
heard
that.
about like Cocoon, and then I remember when they filmed the movie Cocoon, everybody was bragging, that was filmed in St. Pete. And then you think about what Cocoon was. That was just all about, these retired people finding the fountain of youth. It's like, I guess that's where we live. But at the end of the day, to your point, is when you just have, I think, the what's the word I want to use? When you have the overstanding of what's going on, your perception and your how can I say it? The bottom line is you can see the opportunity. Versus, I think
Yeah.
sometimes, living here, you don't always see what's happening right in front. You don't see that forest through the trees. So, as you said, that as the population was rising, you see opportunity, and you saw that growing up from coming to a small town, to quote unquote St. Pete, the big town, the
For
big
me, it
city.
was big. For me, it was much bigger than what I was familiar with, and there were challenges, that came with that growing up. It was an adjustment.
So moving on, you get through grade school. Did you go to all your school here in St. Pete?
Actually, I did. Post high school, I did some trade school. I did community college, P-Tech, SBJC. Then now it's a 4-year school, and South Florida's Bay Borough campus. Back then, that was a community college back in like the late '90s. Today, I should keep up with this stuff, but I don't. Today, I think I know they've built up the South Florida downtown campus. It's tremendous what they've done there. What they've done with SBC now, to me, is even a bigger leap from what it was back during the early and mid 90s when I knew those schools. So all of my education has been local. But again, coming from, those simple, humble beginnings, For me, I think it was practical. I feel like as a teenager, I still hadn't really made that full adjustment, like to go away to school. At one point, I considered going away to art school. As a teenager, I had aspirations of following a path of a career in commercial art, and I was looking at schools down in South Florida. There was a school, I believe, at the time in Fort Lauderdale, but that was too big of a leap for me. And then that path, had I followed that, actually, with the timing of things, you know where I would be right now had I followed that path of commercial art?
I'm
I'd very,
listening.
with the timing of things, I would very likely be probably a very successful web designer. had
Hey,
I followed that path.
wouldn't have been a bad gig.
No, I mean, I don't have bad gigs now, but I think, I don't know. I mean, you are who you are in this world, and I think you find your path, or your path finds you. You know, depending on what you believe in and how you live your life and how you embrace your every day. So I did all my education here. I didn't really want to leave. I only had my mother's family, so that's a small, circle as far as family and the support that we are able to experience from family. So I didn't really want to venture out too far away from the family. Then culturally, we have been poor. A few family members have excelled, and definitely my generation, we've broken whatever ceilings we had in our family. A handful of us have done quite well. Aside from myself, I got cousins out in Dallas that are doing really well out there. They're real estate investors, and aside from their everyday professions, they've done definitely pretty well. I've done okay over time, but I didn't want to venture out too far from the family. So as a teenager, I was cutting hair, and I did that mostly out of necessity. We were poor. I couldn't afford a haircut. So I started out cutting my own hair. And my brother and I don't have any whole siblings. I do have 2 half siblings that I have a relationship with growing up, and even now. And so my brother and I, we would cut each other's hair. And then before long, I'd be cutting the cousins. And I had an R&B group. When I was in high school, I'd be cutting the group's hair. And
What was your group called?
Man, you guys go kind of deep. Marcus, you didn't you didn't give me any warning. I thought we were talking about real estate tonight. So it was I want to say the third phase. We had a couple.
I knew you from somewhere.
We had a couple different names. So we did mostly local stuff. Then I
you guys came to our church. That's what I'm saying. I remember Third Base.
Oh wow.
I'm telling St. Pete, is only so big.
Okay.
And at that time, we had a lot of artists that were kind of doing their thing, because that was the Luke time, but in Florida, everybody was kind of doing their thing. But I do remember Third Base. Like I said, you did come to Belton Community. You guys had somebody in our church was a member involved with Third Base.
Okay.
But either way, keep going.
So anyway, I was cutting the group's hair. I was, cutting hair around the neighborhood. I worked a lot as a young teen. I started working when I was 14. And, coming from that background of, being poverty stricken and struggling to escape, the obscurity of poverty, and, just living in rough environments in the inner city. When we came to St. Petersburg, we definitely we lived in the some of the poorest parts of St. Pete back in those days.
Where'd you live? Where'd you live in St. Pete?
When we first got here, we lived near Booker's Creek, and none of those properties are there anymore. They've torn everything down that was there back then. They've developed that land. I mean, obviously, we all know what's happening in St. Petersburg. But when we lived there were old boarding houses and structures that had like a main living quarters, and then you had a lot of different rooms. And you'd have to sometimes maybe share like a public bathroom, and there would be different individuals that lived in different units. So living in that sort of environment, you didn't, there were a lot of things, we would cut each other's hair, and, you did what you could, just to get by. But to be honest, as a kid, you only remember the good memories. Growing up, I never felt sad, never felt like that was going to be my, finale in life. I never felt like that. I always knew that, God had bigger plans for me, that I would land in a better place in adult life. So when I hit 14, I started working. And I worked all through high school. First job I got, I was a dishwasher. Little restaurant in downtown St. Pete. There's a tall tower down there. I believe it's a Bank of America tower now. Back in the late 80s, it was a Barnett Bank tower.
I remember.
And I worked in a little restaurant called Blaney's Bar and Grill. And Roy Blaney, the owner of that little bar and grill, when you walk inside of this place, it reminded you of that show Cheers from back in the 80s, where, the executives and people would get off work and they would come in and sit down and they'd have drinks and they would talk about their lives and their days. And that was kind of what the whole show was about. Well, this place, it had that same decor. You had brick walls and real wooden tables, very nicely done. Nice little place. Here I was 14 years old.
Now, real quick, now you're 14 years old. Was that even a legal age to work?
Yes, it was. You had to get parental consent, which my mother's health was poor, so she wasn't really able to raise me. Mostly it was aunts and uncles, and I grew up with other family members most of the time. And then there was a lot of instability in my life, but I never knew where I was going to live from one year to the next year. So working was essential. I was an essential worker
way before Corona.
way before Corona. So for me, my plan was to work, get through high school, get some local education, and then start to, put the building blocks into place as far as how I was going to build a future. And
so let me ask you this real quick. Mr. Blaine, was he, how did you know him, or how did you get to know him? Was he white, black,
Oh, he was white. It was an all white establishment. The owner, Mr. Roy Blaney, he was, to be honest, he was a pretty clever guy. He was a successful entrepreneur. I saw what he was doing. Sadly, he was an alcoholic, so he would talk. He probably would talk too much. He would always share with the crew, oh, we did this much for lunch today. Business is good, or, we're a little bit slow, or, hey, we need to pick up, or, like he was kind of an open book. And I didn't really talk to him a lot, but I did listen to him a lot, and I observed him, I watched him. And in those days, we didn't have the internet. But I decided at 14, I like what Mr. Blaney is doing. This is what I want to do. Not a restaurant, though.
Sure, but entrepreneurship.
Yes. So what I did, we didn't have the internet yet in those days. It was 89. So I would go to the library in those days to do my research. I spent countless hours in the reference department. There were periodicals and encyclopedias. Remember those? Remember encyclopedias?
Yes, I do. Remember them well.
So I did my research. I had nothing. I mean, at 14, the family didn't own. I have one uncle that owned his own home, and it stayed that way for a long time in my mother's family. But at that time, it was just that one uncle, and the rest of us, we all rented. We were all kind of living pillar to post. We were still, we went from absolute poverty to relative poverty, which, to be honest, was a big, huge step up. So I was figuring, well, I don't have anything. I have nothing. I have no support system. My family can't do anything for me. If whatever money it's going to take for me to get to where I'd like to be, to get to where Mr. Blaney is, in my mind at 14, I thought, what? I got to get there. I got to get there under my own strength. It's going to have to be me that gets me there. I mean, by the grace of God, of course. But I realized at that early age. So I did the research. Well, what do I need? Who do I need to be? How do I get there? What's involved? Things like education, licensing, different types of businesses. Well, after doing my research, I came to the conclusion, I can do this. 10 years later, at 24, by that time, I had already completed high school. I completed trade school. I was still in school, though. I was still still a full-time student at between SBJC and South Florida. And I was cutting hair like 40 hours a week. So I had that license, and that was working for me. Some other things happened along my way. When the recession hit at the end of the Reagan years, during that first Bush administration, we were in a heavy recession, and Mr. Blaney's business began to suffer. And so he had to lay people off. He laid
Wait,
off.
so you were still working with Blaney off since 14 to how long?
No. From 14 until I want to say I was 16. And
Okay, a couple years.
The economy was so bad at 16. I don't want to skip over those years because something else happened then, and I want to share that. So I went from being a dishwasher at 14 to 16, and I was doing okay. Minimum wage was like $3.15 or $3.25. I was making like $4.50 an hour, and plus tips and whatnot. And for a kid, from Jasper, that was okay for me. So here I had this plan in my head. Okay, my long-term goal, my end game is I'm going to be a small business owner. Short range, I still needed to work. So he had to lay a couple of us off. Even I think even waitresses had to go. One of the cooks had to go. I had to go. So one of my uncles, the one that owned his own home, he had his own business, and he had a floor finishing business, and he did floors at preschools and grocery stores, places like that. His business was called Untouchable Janitorial Services, and his name was Tommy Solomon. And so he knew a manager at Publix, Mr. John Geachin. So he recommended me to Mr. Geachin to hire me on for whatever position he had. He had observed me. My mother's health was at a point where I was on the move again, didn't really have a place to stay. So my Uncle Tommy took me in, and I came to live with him right after I had just gotten laid off from my job as a dishwasher. So he talked to Mr. Geachin. Mr. Geachin hired me. I ended up working for Publix for the next 5 years, never missed a day of work. I was a role model, A1 employee. During my time at Publix, this was a significant time in my life, because here I had in my head, I'm going to be a small business owner later on in life. I'm going to progress. This is going to be the way that I, find my little slice of the American pie. So during that time, I had a store manager, Mr. Theron Dudley. He was a black man, first black manager I had seen at that time. And those were the days when Publix wasn't really, I don't want to say that the company, and no, I'm not knocking Publix. They're a great company. I appreciate the years that I spent there. I have nothing but great memories. I still have friends that are still with the company, and they're all doing well. It's a great company, but Mr. Dudley was the first black manager that I had seen. And not that I had a problem, embracing, I've been able to embrace cultures. That cultural shock leaving Jasper, coming to St. Pete, my life has always been a mesh of cultures. I'm able to my crossover game culturally is phenomenal. I'm able to communicate and connect with all different types of people. In all of my small businesses, I have clients from all different backgrounds, literally from just about every corner of the earth. So anyway, Mr. Dudley, I think, made an impact on me because he was willing to talk to us. So what he would do, we would have these store meetings. And after the store meeting, those of us that chose to sit and just chop it up with Mr. Dudley, he was an open book. So he talked to us about the company, Publix, and everything they had to offer. I realized that not only did they offer profit sharing, but in addition to that, they would allow employees to acquire Publix stock. Then he talked to us about the Publix credit union, everything they had to offer us. He talked to us about the retirement opportunities. I was 17. So I started buying Publix stock at 17 years old. I bought Publix stock for $11 a share. I continued to buy it every pay period. I had my credit union account set up. I had Publix credit union checking, Publix credit union savings, and I bought so many shares of stock every time I got paid. And in those days, I was in high school. I was probably in about between the 10th and 11th grade, and I would work like 35 hours a week on a regular. And I mean, I was still in high school. Honestly, my take home was like, with all the hours that I worked and everything, and I would actually work overtime. I don't know how they got away with that. but I would work overtime as a teenager.
Wow.
Now, I'm not going to lie, I was a C student, but I was a hard worker. So on my job, I did well. In school, I did suffer some, but I still managed to get by. But I was buying up public stock. I mean, every pay period, my take home was like $800 to $1,000 a month. And here I was like a junior, senior in high school. And of my earnings, I started at Publix at like $4.25. I quickly got promoted. I went from being a bagger. Within a couple months, I was on the part-time stock crew. From there, I went to produce. From there, I went to the full-time stock crew. And before long, I was making, I can't really remember now, I want to say between like $8.50 and $10 an hour. And
Oh, wow.
we're talking early 90s.
Yeah, that was good money.
And I was a black kid from Jasper. It got to a point, but see, I think people couldn't understand my position. I had no support. I had no father. My mother's health was poor. She couldn't raise me, couldn't live with her. I was living from, aunts and uncles, from household to household, from year to year. I had to get it. I had to get out. And I felt like in my mind at 18, I got to get out. I got to get out here. I got to stand on my own 2 feet. So anyway.
Now before you keep going, I don't want to, because I know we were supposed to talk about real estate. But, just hearing where you grew up, knowing those type of things, how do you think that, like, you never got into, like, selling drugs or doing anything, off the path?
I thought about it. I don't want to get too deep into that because I don't want to, say certain things about, the people that are closest to me in my inner circle, my loved ones, especially not family members. But I'll just say this. Someone very close to me that would have been my way in, for whatever reason, just told me no. And I'll be honest with you, with the mindset that I have and the skill set that I have and the way that I am, man, I probably wouldn't have made it to 40-something. I probably would have gotten so deep into that world, and I probably would have moved so far up that I'd probably be dead by now. So I thank God that the person that would have been my way in just said no. I did think about it when I was like, I think I was maybe 15, 16. I thought about it. And that's because at the time I lived on 14th Avenue South and 7th Street. That's where my aunt still lives to this day. My Uncle Tommy, sadly, we lost him to lung cancer during recent times. But he lived there. That's where he owned that house. My aunt still owns that house to this day. And I don't know how well you know St. Petersburg, but I lived there before Romeo went to jail.
Yeah. I remember when the whole Romeo thing went down. And today go ahead. Mm-hmm.
Romeo, basically all the kids in the neighborhood worked for Romeo at that time. I mean, if you follow, the path, everybody was working through the pipeline that Romeo brought into the community. And I didn't. And the kids kind of laughed at me, like I was sort of, I was viewed in a negative way. And to be honest, I thought I was a fool. At the time, I was like, well, you know what? I did look at it. I mean, I looked at all of it. I researched that too. I didn't want to do that to my mother, honestly. And my family members, I didn't want to do that while I was still with them. Had I, grown up and gone away from them, and then if I did something like that down the road in life, it would have been different. But as a teenager, I was like, nah, I don't really want to bring that to the family, and that and the one person in my life, and I won't name him, but the one person in my life that would have been my connect basically told me no. So I didn't take that path. Instead, I was stocking shelves at Publix. And I mean, I was a kid in high school. I was making, $800 to $1,000 a month. That wasn't bad. And I was buying Publix stock through Mr. Dudley's encouragement, telling us that we could do that. And I held that stock. A few years later, at 21, I retired. Mr. Dudley had taught us how much time you had to do with the company to become vested, what retirement looked like, what the benefits would be, what your options were. I was 21. I took my retirement benefits in a lump sum. All that stock that I bought, I was getting Publix stock in the beginning, I think I was getting it for less than $10 a share. Then I remember ultimately, I think the highest I paid was about $11 a share. The company did well. If I knew then what I know now, I would have held that stock.
I bet you would have.
But I sold it. I sold it all back to the company. I took all of my retirement benefits in a lump sum. That left me with a lot of money. Remember, I'm a kid from Jasper, and here I was at 21, and I was out on my own by that point for a few years. I was at 21. I feel like I had already completed trade school. I was getting started in the barber and beauty trade, but I was in the early phases. It took me a couple of years to really get going. So I took that money and I kept reinvesting it. I kept reinvesting in myself. I kept reinvesting in my business. By the time I was 24, here it is 10 years later, I'm still thinking back on Mr. Roy Blaney and what I had learned while I was there with him. And at 24, I decided I've seen enough. I'm going to take my shot. The economy was good. It was during the Clinton years. I said, I'm going to take my shot. It got to a point where time was a struggle. And this is what I tell young people, and even people that are older, I tell them that at some point in your life, you've got to make a choice. You got to make a choice. Are you going to be an entrepreneur, or are you going to be on somebody's payroll? And there's nothing wrong with either decision, nothing wrong with either choice, but you got to make that choice. At some point, you have to take that leap. And at 24, I took that leap. I said, you know what? I had done my schooling, wasn't working in my field. I had majored in psychology, and like a lot of, if you, with psychology, man, if you don't, if you don't follow the path all the way through to getting your graduate degrees and even a doctorate, if you don't go that far with it, you're not doing much with it. And then, to be honest, I looked at that path. I looked at a field, they call it industrial psychology. That's where you go into a company, they hire you in-house, you work with their management team to help make the company more productive. I looked at that path, but to be honest, entry-level pay, I was still going to be cutting hair on the weekends. And that didn't look promising. And I still had a whole lot of schooling left to do. So at 24, I made a decision. I said, you know what? I'm young enough to where if I fail, I can still start my life over before I turn 30 and land on my feet and be good. So at that point, I rolled the dice for all of the marbles. I gave 500% effort to my hairstyling, barber, and beauty business, which at that time, I had a pretty good following. I don't know, you're familiar with St. Petersburg. I don't know if you remember the old Robert Salon from the 90s.
Yep, I remember Roberts.
Okay, at that time, it was late 90s. I was 24 years old. I was working at Robert Salon, and I was the only person to pass through that shop. Now, by licensing in the hair business, I'm a licensed cosmetologist, because when I got into the business, there were no barber schools. The closest barber school was Sun State, and they were in Clearwater, which is nothing. But remember, I'm a teenager at the time. The kid from Jasper didn't think it was nothing. Going to Clearwater was like, oh, that's a big leap. I'm already in St. Petersburg. Now I'm supposed to drive all the way to Clearwater, you know, and I didn't even have reliable transportation at the time. I went to P-Tech because it was close. It was within the community. It was easy to get back and forth. I could take a bus if I needed to. My little secondhand, you know, cars could get me there, whatever means, it was easy to get there. So I got the cosmetologist license. I go into Robert's Salon. I had a styling station and a barber station. I'm the only operator that he ever did that with. And when I tell you, I set that place ablaze. I did chemical services. I did men and women. I did thermal work. I did women's haircuts. I did eyebrows. I did the shade. I did everything. And I would spend my days in that shop. I would come in early in the morning before any of the other workers would get there. It'd be like I'd come in with Mr. Roberts, the owner, and we'd be in there like 7 a.m. on a Saturday, and I would go all day on a Saturday until the end of the day. Like it'd be like 7, 8 o'clock at night sometimes later than that, and I would grind all day like that. And I was real good at saving. I was stacking up my resources. I was saving and planning. And I would do my average output in those days. I would do anywhere from like 25 to 35 clients a day. And it was a mix. And eventually the crew that he had in there, their personalities didn't match my personality. I was somewhat of like, I became like I don't know if I would say a black sheep in that shop, but eventually the barbers that he had a lot of issues in that shop. I won't go into that. I don't want to badmouth anyone. But the crew that he had, they did not mesh with me. So I decided that I would leave. I left there. Unknowingly, I had planned on taking 0 people with me because I had built that clientele from the ground. Like I had built it from nothing. So I left there. I went to another shop at the time. It was called Neighborhood Barbers. That was over on 9th and 62nd Avenue South. I went over there. First 1/3 of the whole clientele at Roberts came with me. Without me passing a single card to anybody, without me telling anybody what I was doing. I was 24 at the time. I had the mindset that I could make it. And I had gotten to a point where I was able to feed myself, keep a roof over my head. Now, I had an apartment at Flagler Point. I had a brand new pickup truck. It was a 1998 GMC Sonoma. I had tuition to pay. I had I have a passion for antique Volkswagens. I had a little, I think it was a 69 or a 70 Karmann Ghia. I paid for my insurance on that. I took care of everything I had that I needed to take care of. I took care of it all with what I earned from cutting hair. So at that point, now I had the one thing that I had not had from the age of 14 all the way to 24. The one thing that I didn't have was absolute confidence, unshakable confidence. Now I'm above the fear. At 24 years old, I was above the fear, and I knew that I could make it. I knew I could make it in business, any business. I knew that I could make it in life. I knew that by the grace of God and the strength that he gave me, at 24, you got to understand, I'm a young man at that age, and the energy that I had then, I still have a lot of that flair now, but the energy that I had then, I felt invincible, like we all do at 24. So I went right over to Neighborhood Barbers with the plans of just rebuilding my business from the ground, because I had done it once. I knew what it took. I had a formula now. It didn't take long. Within 6 months, and it was a combination of events. It's not just the fact that I took a lot of the clientele with me. It was the timing of things. You know, Roberts Salon was in trouble. There were a lot of internal problems. They closed up. Not within 6 months of me leaving, they closed up shop. It was done. That was the end of Roberts Salon. Frank, the barber that had his shop down on 18th Avenue, sadly,
yeah, that's where I used to go.
he passed away. I was 24 years old. I took on 2/3 of Roberts Salon. All the clientele they had, 2/3 of it came with me. I inherited, I'll say at least probably 20% of Frank's clientele. Plus I had my own following. When I tell you, I worked 14 hours a day, 14 hours a day. And at that point, I said, okay, this is it. I remember the day. I mean, I'm a little bit raw right now. Marcus has probably never seen me like this. I'm a little bit raw right now. So I remember at the time. I remember at the time, I said, okay, I know what I need to do. I had a file that I had been keeping. And this is what I tell kids when they have these dreams and goals and things they want to do in life, but they don't know how they're going to make it. So the 14-year-old that had no resources, that had nothing, well, this 24, 25-year-old, now I had a lot of what I needed. I had just about everything that I needed. You know, I had the resources. I had some education. I had a lot of life's experiences. I had an active, thriving practice that was growing and really bursting at the seams. I had enough clientele to run a whole shop. So that was what I did. I started getting the equipment that I needed. I had a file that I started. I called it Salon Notes. I wish I still had that now. I should have I should have held on to that. But anyway, I kept that file folder for all those years. From a teenager, here I am in my 20s, I'm still adding to that file folder. Every time I did a piece of research, every time I had an idea, every time I met somebody new, every time I went to a hair show, every time I went to a seminar, every time I had a conversation with somebody sitting in my chair and they said something to me that I felt like, you know what, I can use that, or I felt inspired by it, I would add everything to that file. That's all I had. For a long time, all I had was the file. Everything else had to come later. So here I was at Neighborhood Barbers, and it was, by then it was around like the year 2000. I feel like I was 25 or maybe I was turning 26. And I decided, you know what, I'm going to make a move. And so I got all the equipment that I needed. There's a little, again, you know, St. Petersburg, the Maxi Mall. Remember the little mini storage place that was there for many years?
Oh, it's still there. That's the only thing that's really
Okay.
left there. The other part of it is real.
Okay, so
Yep,
I
yep.
went and got a storage unit right there. I started collecting everything I needed. I was using, I feel like we had the internet, but it might have still been kind of new. I might have been doing some searches on Yahoo. I think I was, because this was around like the year 2000. And then I was using the classified ads in the St. Pete Times, and I found salon owners that were selling equipment. I found a lady out in Seminole that had a salon that she was selling. So I called her up after a productive conversation with her. I asked her, well, you know, what do you have? And what do you, you know, what are your plans? What are you willing to sell? What are you, you know, just talk to me. And I bought everything that she had in that shop for cash. So I don't remember now, but it was a good deal. So I had my GMC Sonoma pickup truck. It took a few trips out there, but I drove out to Seminole. I had her make me out receipts for each load that I took back. At that time, Seminole wasn't nearly, this was like 20 years ago almost. Seminole was not nearly as diverse as it is today. So I explained to her, I'm like, look, I'm Black. I'm likely to get stopped. I just need something that says, hey, you know, I paid for these items. This is where they came from. So she was like, I understand that. And she gave me like a handwritten invoice or whatever. And I took that and I took all of that equipment and I took it, put it in my storage unit. I found the spot over on Fifth Avenue. And when I got there, the property could still use a little TLC right now even. But I was looking for a certain type of property. And this is where real estate starts to come into play. So at that time, I was like 26 or 27. And I was looking for a property where it wasn't going to be a whole lot of resistance. I had good credit already. I had established that during the years that I spent as a member of the Public's Credit Union. So at 18, I already had good credit. And I had a good history, my tax history, and everything was good. But I still, you know, to rent something that was commercial space, I was like, oh, I don't know what the requirement's going to be. Let me find something that's owned by an individual so that I could set up my business there. And then 20, 25 years later, probably I could buy the property. I could acquire the property. So I met the owner, you know, that was productive. He happened to know some of my clients at the time. So he was able to get word of mouth referrals on me. And they told him that I was a good guy. And then I talked to them about him. They told me that he was a good guy. So on a handshake, I mean, we had a little, you know, formal written lease or whatever. On a handshake, we made our deal. We agreed to terms. I brought him the cash. I'll never forget. I was in, by this point, I wasn't living in Flagler Point anymore. I had downsized and I took a little, like a studio in Coquina Key. Now I was living above the fear, but at 26, 27, I had seen recessions. I had seen economic trends come and go. I had seen the real estate market rise. I'd seen it fall. I'd seen a lot of things. So I knew that although I was moving forward in life and in business, I still needed to be careful. So I downsized a little. And I had a nice apartment, though. I call it downsizing. Man, you're familiar with St. Petersburg, Coquina Key Arms, back in the back. Not the north end, but the south end.
Yep, I know exactly what you're talking about.
And it was so nice then. I had an apartment.
It still is nice, I think.
Just, it is. They converted it to condos. I think it's called something Waterside, Chase Waterside, something like that.
Something like that, yep.
So in those days, there were still apartments. I had an apartment on the water for like less than $500 a month back in those days, which was crazy. And again, though, I had good credit, good background, good rental history. I was able to get in fairly easily. So I had downsized a little bit. So I was in my apartment with my then girlfriend, and I'm just counting out cash on the floor. I'm counting it out like stacks of 100 at a time, and I'm just stacking it up, piling it up. And so I tell her, I was like, baby, it's gonna happen. It's gonna happen now, and so I went, made my deal with the guy over the same property. I still lease the space from him now. And when we got there, I'll never forget it. She saw that space. I gotta be careful. My better half is in the next room. I don't want her to be offended by me saying some of the things I'm saying now. So we got there. I will never forget it. The place smelled funny. There were cobwebs. It was really rough. Inside of that unit where I have the barbershop now, I needed a ton of work. But on paper, the location was sound. So we're standing there, we're looking around, and she's like, is this it? Are you sure? I said, yes, this is it. Whatever is going to happen next, whatever I'm about to do, I'm going to do it right here. I mean, pretty much the rest is history as far as Clipper Cuts.
Ray, hey, this is Mark here. Fast forward to today. What is it, September?
Okay.
Me knowing a little bit about you and now having gotten to know a little bit more, I've been very impressed from the beginning, but after hearing the story, I'm more impressed. But there's so many questions, man, and so much that I would like to break down. But as for right now, I know we don't have as much time because I don't want to hold too much of your night up. But part of what we do with Weber Brothers is we're like a generational conduit of for information to pass down to Black men of all ages.
Okay.
We're fortunate to have somebody on like yourself, and the whole goal is to just put out content and have kids hear your story and other Black role models within the community, actually have them hear stories like, what you said. I mean, you really lamented some very important details that I don't even know if kids these days really understand some of the things that you've broken down about I can't think of the guy's name you mentioned before, your former boss, but just that, that time period where you was actually seeking mentorship, learning, saving, and from what it sounds like from 14 to 24, that's a bit of a decade where, a lot was going on and you were focused and adamant about, achieving your goals. And that's commendable, man. I'm very fortunate enough to have heard some of the things you discussed today. I really am going to share some of the stuff with my child. But I just, can you get into the real estate? Because I have some questions pertaining to one of the things that we were talking about internally is sort of the Weber Brothers' goal is to help the community buy back the block, so to speak, to help stop gentrification, to help people through the proper content, through the proper relationships, actually buy homes and become first-time homeowners, which we're so poorly represented. I feel like in a real estate market now. So can you go into detail as to what are you doing now? Some of the things that are, relevant to first-time homeowners, and just information pertaining to your real estate acumen.
Okay, so I've been, actually, I started with the mindset of an investor, and I bought the first thing that I bought. I think I was like 18, 19 years old. I bought a mobile home. I lived in that for a short time, then sold it. So that was actually the first property that I bought. Then years later, when I was about 30, I bought my first single family home. Unfortunately for me, the timing was bad. It was supposed to be a modest flip. My plan was to hold it for about, say, 3 to 5 years, sell it, make like 20, 30,000 on the deal. Unfortunately, 2008, the market crashed, the bottom fell out. I ended up holding that property for 15 years. I made a lot more on it over that time span. 2018, I decided, oh wait, let me reverse back a little. Remember when I was looking for space for the barbershop, I wanted to find a property that I would have an opportunity to acquire after about 20 to 25 years. We're at year 19 right now, and we are talking. I don't want to get too deep into that, but we are talking. So I decided that and that's just me, my whole life, like going to the library, to the reference department, in the encyclopedias and the periodicals, reading, just taking in what I could take in. So I decided, hey, I'm going to get into the real estate business. I'm going to learn what I don't know about real estate. I already had learned a lot, with the mindset of an investor. But I said, I'm going to get the rest of it. I'm going to learn about the mortgage business. I'm going to learn about the money part of real estate. I want to acquire this property. I'm going to go and fill my toolbox with the necessary tools. So I'll admit, I'm setting the table for my retirement now. I'm in my 40s. I'm setting the table for my retirement. So when I get to be in my 60s, God willing, my 70s, my table is set. So I got the license. First property that I listed as a licensed realtor was my own property. And I sold it relatively quickly. As my practice progressed, I sold properties I'm primarily a listing agent. I also, let me give you my specs as far as my real estate practice. So I started in 2018, and I was doing the course that year and getting the license, but I was also prospecting. And the early deals that I closed, I was already working those deals even in 2018. Sometimes it takes a long time to close a real estate transaction. So today I'm dually licensed in the state of Florida. I'm a licensed realtor, meaning I can handle any transaction, although I tend to do mostly residential. I'll say from the low hundreds to the low 400s. That's been my range. I'm also a licensed mortgage loan originator. I'm sure you see the Rocket Mortgage branding behind me. What I do for Rocket is I originate.
I have a question. I want to jump in for 1 second. You said that the amount that you sell homes around was what again? 300 to 400?
No, my range, my transaction range, like properties that I'm usually dealing in, usually my range is from the low hundreds to the low 400s. Those are the people that I usually am dealing with. Of course, I have the capacity to go beyond that. And once I get into the mortgage side of it, I'll elaborate on that.
Yeah, and I was just gonna ask, because it doesn't that range almost makes up that what is it, up to 250? It's considered I know there's a range like within homes, which consider I think low income housing. Is it up to 250?
To be honest, I'm not terribly familiar with those statistics.
Metrics. Okay.
Yes, I'm not terribly familiar with, in correlation of housing price to what would be considered low-income housing. To be honest, though, I tend to associate low-income housing with rentals and the HUD fair market rental. When I think about low-income housing, that's where my mind goes to, which I don't deal in rentals too much. I don't want to, and I know we weren't going to talk rentals, but when we talk low-income housing, a lot of times, especially in the bank sector, is from the standpoint of them knowing that they need to give so many of those types of loans in our areas. And so I know a big conversation, a topic conversation that we've been talking a lot about is, around redlining and, like I said, getting back to gentrification. But when you look at the banks and the fact that they do business in certain communities, they are regulated, to do so many loans with quote unquote low income housing. And what you find down at the city is that, they're always looking to raise that quote unquote AMI. And so what they'll do is they'll subsidize a lot of those homes. So a lot of times in their new home
programs or first-time homebuyer programs, they'll subsidize those homes, right? So in order to continue to get the certain AMIs in the area, you know, they'll give them the 50,000 down, or they'll even do sometimes land leases, right? Such that they can get those people into those low-income housing. So that's essentially where I was going when I was thinking from a low-income housing standpoint, if that makes sense.
Okay. And I want to get there. So I'm
And
doing
the only reason why I mentioned that is because you do mortgages too. So I know they kind of go hand in hand when you're looking at a person's vitality of being able to afford a certain type of mortgage in a certain area.
Yes, that's right. So being duly licensed now on the realtor side of the business, my designations and certifications, I am accredited buyer's agent. So I do work with buyers. I don't market for buyers. I don't look for them, mostly because of the market conditions. But people that know me, they reach out to me or they refer somebody to me that they do know, and then I will work with buyers. You know, on occasion, I don't go out seeking them. And then anytime you have listings in the real estate business, you're going to attract a lot of buyers. I refer them out. I'm at a point now where I'm a certified mentor with my brokerage, which is eXp Realty. And I'm mentoring other agents now. I onboarded the first new agent recently last month, and I've got the next new agent in play. They're both Black males, both younger than myself, which is good. If you want to change the way that things are happening in any industry, and we're talking about real estate now, well, you change the demographics, which aside from, you know, setting the table for my own retirement, for taking care of my own transactions, working my own deals, and believe me, I could stay busy just doing that. If I wanted to, I wouldn't need to do anything else. I could just work all of my own transactions and, you know, there's probably no limit to the things that I could be getting involved in right now. But instead, what I choose to do with all of my certifications and designations and all of the tools that I have in the toolbox, I came to this business not for the purpose of just, you know, setting my own table or whatnot, but I came to serve the underserved demographics. I came to service the underserved demographics, which would be the folks that you're talking about. Now, on the realtor side, with all those designations that I have, I do work with investors a lot, and investors hold a lot of these properties. But this is what people may or may not know. A lot of these investors are not people from outside of the community. A lot of my investors, they're Black, and they're holding multiple properties. I know Black investors that have portfolios of like a dozen plus properties and even beyond that. So I have a designation to do 1031 exchanges. Not sure if you're familiar with those. I have an SFR designation. That's for short sales, foreclosures, and real estate owned properties. And a lot of these are the properties that you're talking about when you talk about low-income housing. Unfortunately, the way that things have been, they tend to slip through the cracks and not wind up under the ownership of some of these folks that you mentioned. What else? I have
and it's funny you mentioned that, Ray, about the most of your investors being Black.
Not most of them, but some of them. I don't want to misrepresent, but some of them, you'd be surprised. Several.
Yeah, and I think we need to shed more light on that through the appropriate channels, because there's this notion out there that we aren't necessarily investing it within our own communities. And
I would like to say it's not true.
Yeah.
My opinion.
Yeah. I mean, I respect it, and I'm not necessarily going either way. I'm just saying there's a notion out there. So the more we can illuminate, the narrative, then the better off that our community could, in my opinion, we could then begin to be able to really reestablish the concepts of group economics and actually working together and continuing to breed investors and raise children to think and to buy and to hold and stuff like that.
That's true. I think it's best when you get to them early Remember Mr. Roy Blaney? I was 14. Though he was a white man from outside of the community, he didn't know he was teaching me, but I learned from him. Mr. Theron Dudley, that old store manager at Publix, I learned from him. I learned about the concept of investing, about spending money on something today that's going to be worth a lot more money in the not even so distant future. When I sold that Publix stock, from the time I bought it at 17 for like $9, $10, $11 a share, I sold it at $33 a share at 21. And it's that kind of mindset when you understand that if you just take a few dollars, that wasn't even a lot of money. I was a teenager still in high school. It wasn't a lot of money. If we could get that, if we could convey that thought to younger people, you know, within our communities, we could start breeding them. When they turn 13 and 14, you'd be surprised what a child is thinking when they're 13 years old. You'll be surprised. And there's a lot of room for them to think about a lot of things if we just plant the seed. You don't know who they're going to grow up to become like later on in life. And it was planting those seeds. Definitely it was planting those seeds. And some of those kids grew up to be some of these investors that I'm dealing with now. And I am dealing with some investors, and they're Black. I mean, and it's so funny. It's like you have these groups of investors, right? Sometimes investors will work as a team. And I'm going to get to that when I get to the mortgage side of it. Sometimes investors will work together as a team, right? And there are different roles that everyone plays. Well, when it comes time for me to convince a seller, hey, I think you should sell to this investor. Well, before that happens, before we get to that point where we actually go into contract and that deal goes into escrow, guess what? I got to meet the guy. I got to meet the guy. I got to have a conversation with him. I need proof of funds. You know, like we got to have a very real conversation to see, is this real? Is this going to happen or not? Because until we get to that point, it's a lot of speculation, it's a lot of talk. And sometimes it's either a foreign person or it's a Black person. And a lot of times it's a brown person. You know, that's been what I've experienced in the real estate market. So it's not exactly like people think. I don't know if you all listen to a lot of radio, if you follow a lot of political news or just news in general, but I heard something interesting lately. The 2020 census reported a decline in non-Hispanic white Americans and an increase in virtually every other demographic. So,
but I feel like that's been going on forever. I feel like that's been going on for a long time, actually.
Black people and brown people have actually increased in population. So what does that look like for real estate? This is what's going to happen. This is my prediction, and you probably would agree with me. Those that we have known as minorities for really my lifetime, as time progresses forward, I give it 20 years. The new minorities are going to be not people of color, not Black and brown people. They're going to be non-Hispanic white Americans. They're gradually becoming the new minority in America. And then you break down the demographic further and you look at all the different subcultures. You know, you look at the LGBTQ community, you know, you look at more liberal-minded, non-Hispanic white Americans. They amongst themselves are divided like any other demographic. You know, we are too. But their numbers get smaller. So what does that mean, you know, in business and in real estate? It means that the dynamic is changing. There's a paradigm shift. It's changing. It's happening right now.
And I think St. Pete is a true microcosm of that.
Well, this is what's happening. I'm going to tell you what's happening. The people that we feel like are being displaced from St. Petersburg, and many of them are lower income people, many of them are being displaced. And a lot of the buyers that are coming in, they are from outside of the community. They are not people of color a lot of times. And they're going into these old neighborhoods because of a popular downtown trend, you know, that sort of thing. And they're buying up all of these properties. My opinion is that we should teach our young people today to do better at the next stop. I mean, to try to fight at this point, to try to gain some ground or to recover what was lost. I mean, my personal experience, and remember, I grew up in St. Petersburg, although I haven't really lived there since my, I feel like it was my early 20s. After I left that apartment in Coquina Key, I never came back to St. Petersburg. I lived in Clearwater. I bought a property in an unincorporated area on the outskirts of Pinellas Park in Kansas City. During recent years, I built a home here in Parrish where I currently reside. So the real estate market in St. Petersburg would not allow me to get back in, not on the residential level. Commercial is different. Residential, I think I had too much of an understanding about real estate, about the market, about things that I wanted, things that I did not want. I couldn't get what I wanted in St. Petersburg, not from an investment standpoint, nor from a layperson standpoint, like, oh, you know, I want to live in this type of house. Like I couldn't get what I wanted in St. Petersburg. So that led me away. And for young minorities, young Black people and brown people, to be honest, I think that the opportunity is outside of St. Petersburg. And that's just based on what I've seen early on and looking at the trends, the new subdivisions that they're building over here in Manatee, that they're building in Hillsborough County, even Pinellas County. When you go up around Trinity, when you go over to Hillsborough, you go over to Manatee, you go, if you stay in Pasco, you go to the Newport Richey area. You go and you look at who's buying these homes, who's building these homes, who's moving in. A lot of people of color are. A lot of people of color. So
well, I was gonna say they're moving them out of St. Pete and they're moving them out of Tampa, and those are the areas they're moving them to.
So how does that affect?
But these are not low income people.
No, they aren't. What they are is the people that can actually buy homes now.
Exactly.
Because they can't afford the home in St. Petersburg or in Tampa. So where they're making affordable homes and they're making them look nice, you know, they're putting nice size, right? It's more size than you ever had, right? The neighborhood and everything feels good. And that's where, you know, we're moving because we aren't necessarily comfortable with what's moving into our neighborhood. But to me, that's another story because I really like what you're saying, or it's actually interesting. You know, I hadn't had that thought as much about moving to the outskirts so much as what I saw happen in South Florida that I see happening here, which is why I would never want to sell in St. Pete, because it's like, why would I give up what I have and not try to get more, knowing that this value's gonna stabilize right around where it's at, and it's gonna just continue to go up.
Hey, can I jump in real quick, Ray and Justin? Man, I've been very much flattered by this conversation. In fact, some of the things that you mentioned, like the 1031 exchange, the proof of funds, is there a way we could have you on at a later date rate so we could get sort of into the, you know, the concepts that you were lamenting, because it's some good information, and I knew there was an original like time limit on it, and I don't want to sell us short, and I don't want to sell information short, not going into details, because here's the thing, part of our listeners that we're wanting to, I guess, cater to, a lot of times they're going to be on the, I hate to say low income side, so let me backtrack. They may or may not need more information regarding just the initial phases, proof of funds, closing costs. Some of that stuff, I think we need to dive in a little bit more for the laymen, just to break it down, you know, so that people can actually understand how to close and how, you know, what all they need to go to closing with, so that we can actually, you know, be able to continue to buy homes in some of these other markets. And I'm very much interested in the opportunity outside of St. Pete. And then you mentioned something else previous to that too. I want to, you said it was almost too late. I guess before we close, and I hope that we can reschedule again down the line.
Absolutely.
But before we close, can you just touch briefly on the part you were saying where it's not too late? No, I'm sorry.
You were talking about gentrification. I think you were saying
No,
it's probably too late to get it
about,
on this road.
It's too late. It's too late. Believe me when I tell you it's too late. To be honest, for that effort to have worked, we would have needed to be working it like early 90s when the market was down. From that time to this time, and I don't know if you all follow the real estate market the way that I always have, even before becoming a licensee, just with an investor mindset, watching what has happened to the real estate. And then you look at the people, what happens when our grandparents pass away and they leave property to us, when our parents pass on, they leave businesses behind for us. Culturally, a lot of Black people, particularly in South St. Pete, we haven't exhibited a good track record. We haven't done well. Grandma leaves the house to us, and what happens? 5 years later, we lost the house. Why? Because we didn't pay the taxes on it, or we had codes violations, and they play that game with you too. If you don't sell, then what else happens? You got the grandkids in there, and they're selling drugs out of the house, and now the community wants you out. We have the opportunity that we had in St. Petersburg, and I feel like the older generation, they knew, like, they appreciated, they took care of their properties. They worked hard to keep their communities uplifted. And sadly, over time, there have been fewer and fewer of those people, and more of the people that just did not do the things that would have helped the people of South St. Pete to buy back the neighborhoods. Or you didn't have to buy it back. You already owned it. You were inheriting it. All you had to do was hold it.
But we lost a lot of men.
All you had to do was hold it.
We lost a lot of men, though, and they didn't know what to do. They really didn't have the guidance. And we've had this talk a few times on the Weber Brothers about how many people didn't have a grandfather. Forget a dad.
That's true.
But the grandfather really was. We have the grandmoms, but that granddaddy, man, you listen to that granddaddy no matter what. And that granddaddy gave you some wisdom that was way different than, and to me, those were the Mr. Dudleys. And, and like I said, listening to your story, and I know that we were supposed to, and I think we did touch enough on at least real estate and mortgage and how you got there. No, I'm serious, because I think not having the history part of that, I think that, how you got there means a lot to who you are today and how you even able to even be where you are. Because to be honest with you, to actually have started a job at 14, most kids can't do that today because they can't wait to get money. And then when they get it, it's not enough. What is this taxes thing? What is it? Oh, I might as well not even do that. And then what is the example they see at home? Why would I work when I can get this check? And, so just to be working at 14, because my experience of working 14, that's why I say you're probably too young, but I know I got kind of that exception thing too. Mom being sick, that kind of thing. That's what it's kind of interesting about that. But I saw what I didn't want to be, but I worked at a country club, like you said, where I could listen to some conversations too. Right. And I had somebody challenge me and tell me what I wasn't going to do. So I was like, okay, you're going to tell me what kind of college I should look at. And, his thing was you should probably stay local at one of these smaller things, and looking at Ivy League colleges, that's probably not going to be good enough for you. So that was my challenge coming at, being at Lakewood Country Club washing dishes. Right. But to your point, it's the lessons that we learn from that. And I think some of that discipline, and the fact that, and I think a lot of that humble beginnings, and what that humble beginnings reminds me of also is foreigners, honestly. When you get people that come from like your islands or from, they see nothing but opportunity when they get here. But when we've kind of had every type of social service make sure that, right, that this was covered, that was covered, it can make things a little, your entitlement kind of, we see the things that we feel like we're entitled for, And I think that has been a big issue for the Black community, especially when it comes to understanding the mechanics of excelling, and a lot of that drive that it comes, that comes with it. And the real truth of it, like you said, it doesn't take that long. It just takes a little discipline,
That's
Like
true.
the time that you took between Publix and what your stock did with that bit of discipline, that wasn't very long, you
No, it
know.
wasn't very long. It was not. Uh, it doesn't take much time. Yeah, it doesn't take much time at all. I wish we could have gotten more into the mortgage side.
Oh no, we will, and that's where I really want to take like this part two, and I'm willing to do it on your schedule, and obviously it's easier to jump kind of right back into that because to me it's like there's two sides of what you're saying right now, and I think it's so awesome that you know both of them very well, which is kind of the mortgage side, what that sheet needs to look like, you know what I'm saying, what that paperwork needs to look like, but then also where to buy. What's smart to buy, because most people, at least from my vantage point, because I get a lot of people ask me, well, Justin, I want to go buy a house. I ready to buy my first house. And you think your first house was to look like your parents' house today. It's like we forgot the starter home. We forgot, we forgot, some of these other little crucial steps in the building of the house and building of that. Even you talking about your steps to the home that you knew you were supposed to be in. It wasn't the first one. And I
No,
think those are important things that we all need to think about. And I think, once again, those are some of the things that get lost without having some of those humble beginnings. That's all.
that's very true. That's very true. Real quick, I talked about some of what I can do on the realtor side. Not all of it, though. I could do for people that have less to work with, and I do have some clients like that. Just people that know me. Everybody is not able to, make big moves. Some people have to make smaller moves first. I've got a legitimate rent-to-own program, and that would be a good fit for a lot of people. For people that I have resources to help people that need to repair credit and improve credit, have a lot of resources there. And what people don't realize is that when you get your credit score up, like if you got a 640, right now, I can get a first-time home buyer, meaning anyone that has not owned a property for 3 years prior to application. Even if you've got a couple dings on the credit history, I can get them up to $7,500 to go towards down payment money, to go towards closing costs. Okay, at Rocket, we allow gift letters. These are funds that someone could give you just by giving you a letter. We don't need to verify, validate exactly where they came from. We can do, on the mortgage side, we can do FHA loans, of course, conventional loans, VA loans, USDA loans, which USDA loans and VA loans are 100% loan to value loans. We can also do jumbo loans. We can do a jumbo loan right now at Rocket with 10.01% down. I don't know if you all are familiar with jumbo loans or what you do with jumbo loans or what the
And
like.
see, and I am. I know. I don't know if Marcus is, and I know most of our listeners probably won't be. But that's why it's like we gotta reschedule, because
And then
those are the things that I think are important for us
not
to jump.
only
And I
that,
want Ruben on this too, because Ruben
okay,
is kind of our banker guy.
okay,
And so these are always topics of conversation with us. So I just don't want to get too far into that. But it's just like
okay.
I see that you are definitely a one-stop shop when it comes to
I can,
your first time home buy, pretty much anybody in that residential space looking to buy a home, like you say, comfortably for you between the 100 and 400,000 mark.
well, no, it's not that I can't go beyond that. I mean, jumbo loans, we're talking 500 million too.
Sure.
We'll
Hmm.
go up to 2.5 million at Rocket on a jumbo loan with 10%, essentially with 10%. That's huge. Standard used to be 25% for years. Then it was 20.
Hmm.
Now 10%. That's a life changer. Let me just paint a picture. You talk about buying a neighborhood. You could put together a team or a group, even if it's just for one endeavor. You could put together a group. If we can qualify those individuals and line those monies up, we could put together a jumbo loan. And there are some opportunities you might acquire a whole block, a whole city block for that kind of money. I mean, we're not talking, a couple hundred, few hundred thousand. If we line up the right individuals that are looking to move forward together, we can line up that financing. And then the best part of it, I'm what they call a Rocket Pro, which is like a hybrid mortgage loan originator. Because I'm a realtor, I'm bringing between 1 to 3 loans a month to Rocket Mortgage. I hope I'm not going to get into any kind of we don't cross-pollinate the branding. But I mean, in an official capacity, I would never, I'm either talking about one brand or another brand. I don't really mix the two. But on the loan side, we have what we call the Rocket Pro credits. These are lender credits. And a lot of people are not familiar with lender credits. Well, what does a lender credit look like? Well, right now, I didn't look at my rate sheet this morning. It's been a busy day. But right now, our lender credits will go up to 2.75% of the loan amount. That's huge.
Wow.
That's real money that'll be thrown closing costs. So for the right buyers, and it doesn't even matter, as long as with Rocket, the rule is you're buying as an individual or as a group of individuals. So no LLCs, no S corporations. Believe me, I really, you know what, that may change in the future. I'm working on that.
Got it. Hey, and that's how those things work. When they see the business, they'll go to it. If it makes sense.
Eventually. And I feel like the Rocket Pro platform, maybe that'll be that segue into that. But for right now, individuals under your own personal tax identification number, your own social personal tax identification number. We can do investment. We can do even commercial, residential. I mean, to be honest, there's really there's no ceiling when you're talking real estate and being able to put together loans. People don't understand that when you add another applicant to a loan application, they don't understand how it works. They don't understand.
It's interesting you say that, because I've had situations where, you try to ask people to help you. And like you say, they don't understand how it works. But, once again, I think that's just something really to get in the conversation, because I think that all those elements are things that our listeners definitely need to hear. And I want to make sure that we have time to really jump into detail. Especially
Ray, before we go, can you just give us your number and your contact information so people that's listening can know where to reach you at?
Oh, absolutely. You can reach me at ray.brown@exprealty.com, Raymond Brown at rocketpro.com, or 727-204-5054. And that's my mobile number. And I always ask anyone, please, if I don't answer right away, please leave a message. I have heavy days. I still got my shops running. I'm still CEO of Clipper Cuts Inc., so it's like, that's a lot of work in itself, but I do manage the fusion of everything. I mean, at the end of the day, I'm an entrepreneur and I'm on the clock basically from 8 to 8.
Well, thank you, my brother, for joining. We'll touch base on, rescheduling for part 2 of this conversation. Thanks again.
That sounds good. I want to get deep into the mortgage talk.
Absolutely.
Because that's the key, is if you can bring the money to people, that's the key right there.
Wow, what gems! We hope you enjoyed the transparency and learned something valuable from each of the brothers' experiences, and can find ways to effectively bridge the gap with younger and older people in your life. This in turn will help you to understand and communicate better with people in your life, regardless of what generation they belong to. Each of the brothers you heard from are available to contact if you want to discuss anything that you heard or want to talk about. Just head over to webofbrothers.com to learn more. You will also find links to past episodes, ways to support Web of Brothers, how to become part of the web, and features on brothers making moves. Thank you again for listening, and be sure to check us out next week for a new episode of Web of Brothers.